Hello, and today I have a little experiment I want to do in camera stabilization. I've got the Sony a7S III here, and this camera records some special data with the file called gyro data that I want to use to stabilize some moving shots. Now, there's some new ways of processing this data that I couldn't do when I first got the camera, and that's what I want to try out.
So let's talk about this new software, and by the way, this is not sponsored. So the thing I'm excited about here is this open source free plugin called Gyroflow, which you can download and then you install it in your editing program. I installed the OFX version for DaVinci Resolve, which is what I'll be demonstrating in this video. Here we are in Resolve, and I've loaded up a clip in my edit timeline that has no stabilization applied whatsoever, and I have clicked over to the Fusion tab. Then I add the effect Gyroflow. The next step is to click Load for Current File, which creates a Gyroflow file for this video file. Then you click Open in Gyroflow. So now it's opening that video file in Gyroflow, it's analyzing the metadata, and it's automatically stabilizing it. Here I have trimmed the beginning and the end of where I want the video clip to be analyzed. Sometimes I do that so that it doesn't analyze the shaky beginning and ending parts of a clip, because that can create too much zoom in the stabilization. You do have to use a lens profile that is the same as the lens that you used for your footage or similar. And once I've got my basic stabilization done, I go down to Export and I choose Export Project File including Process Gyro Data, just like that. Then we go back to Resolve, we click Load for Current File again. And look at that, my clip is magically stabilized. Now let's take a look over here at the parameters. I can adjust the smoothness. This is the main one that matters the most. You just increase this to make your stabilization smoother, and you can decrease it to make it less smooth. This might remind you a lot of the stabilization parameter in Catalyst, if you've used Sony Catalyst Browse or Catalyst Prepare, but it's not actually the same. And the big difference that matters to me comes in when you set it at a very low level. Like I'm gonna set it here to 0.03. With Gyroflow, when you set the stabilization to a lower level, it still adds a bit of smoothness overall to everything, instead of completely smoothing some parts and then leaving some parts jittery, which is what Catalyst does. And the reason this matters to me is because it allows me to dial in exactly what look I want for my handheld footage. So let's say I want it just a little bit smoother. I type in 0.04, and now it's just a little bit smoother than before, but it still has that handheld look. But let's say I'm not really digging this crooked horizon in parts of the shot. You can see it's kind of crooked. Okay, no worries. Go into Gyroflow, go to Horizon Lock, and just crank that up. Now I still have the handheld look, but my horizon is no longer drifting around. It's much more straight. Now if this footage still looks a little bit jittery to you, that's because it's missing one crucial element, motion blur. For that, I'm going back into Fusion, and I'm going to add one more node, RSMB. Real Smart Motion Blur. This is a paid motion blur plugin that I've been using for almost 10 years now, and it works pretty well. And now we've got some pretty natural looking motion blur. And the best thing about Gyroflow compared to Catalyst is that you don't need to pre-render your clips before bringing the stabilized footage into your editing program. It's a plugin, so you can continue to go back into Fusion and you can tweak all the parameters as much as you want and then continue editing. That's how Gyroflow works. Now I'm going to do some real world tests of how well I can actually use it in common filmmaking scenarios. In my film school unscripted studio, I've created a method I call Fusion. Fusion is my system for mixing together my mirrorless camera, 360 camera, action camera, and smartphone to create shots and scenes that would otherwise be difficult or impossible as a solo shooter. Fusion is all about learning the strengths and the weaknesses of each camera so you can dynamically switch between them as you shoot, keeping your creativity flowing. You'll see me shoot a fashion film, a travel video, a cocktail bar ad, a seamless transitions video, and a vertical video. Each Fusion lesson has an in-depth, real-world shooting tutorial followed by an editing timeline breakdown in DaVinci Resolve. And here's the best part. You'll get a download link to my DaVinci Resolve project file and the video clips from each lesson, so you can see the edit on your own computer. And as a bonus, I'm including my lighting in motion lesson. This lesson is all about moving your lights for dynamic effects and mixing together different lighting sources. Have you ever put a light on a gimbal? I bet not, but you're about to learn how.
You're gonna learn some techniques that I guarantee you haven't tried before. And the entire lighting kit still fits in a backpack. There's a lot to learn. Click the link in the video description and find out more about Unscripted Studio.
So here I am moving as smoothly as possible while hand holding the camera. I'm very closely watching the horizon to make sure it doesn't drift too much, and I'm trying to avoid any sudden jerks in my body movement. And here's how it looks without any stabilization whatsoever. And once again, the IBIS on the camera is turned off completely. There is no stabilization going on in the camera because that messes up the gyro stabilization later. So here are the results with Gyroflow at a high setting. That means that I'm attempting to emulate the look of a gimbal, I'm trying to remove all shakes, and I'm trying to keep the horizon level. And now here's Gyroflow at a low setting, which means that the smoothness parameter is turned down, and I'm just trying to create a smoother handheld look. I still want that handheld feeling. So these little bits of shake here and there, those are intentional. I'm trying to make it look like it was recorded handheld with a heavier cinema camera.
Now we have changed locations and I have changed lenses. I'm using the Viltrox AF 50mm f1.8, so I have a 50mm lens. And the question is, how does this look when using a longer focal length? So we're just gonna do a little walking around this beautiful little cafe.
Here I am following behind my subject, and I'm filming him sitting down at a table. The unstabilized footage has a lot of nasty handheld jitters in it, but I keep my subject well centered in the frame, which gives me a lot of room around him to stabilize it later and crop in a bit if needed. And here's Gyroflow at the high setting. All shakes have been removed, and it's supposed to look like a gimbal or even a dolly. And now we're going for that smoother handheld look. Not perfectly smooth, but not distractingly jittery either, somewhere in the middle. And here's the much more challenging shot. I am tracking backward with him as he walks into the restaurant. Predictably, there are a lot more shakes in the raw footage, but I'm also using a really fast shutter speed, which means that there won't be any unwanted motion blur later on when I go to stabilize it. Now I've tried to remove all the jitters in Gyroflow, and it does result in a pretty significant crop, but unlike Catalyst Browse, I don't see a noticeable softening of the image. Catalyst tends to render it a bit softer, Gyroflow does not. And now I left some shakes in, maybe a little bit too many shakes depending on the look that you're going for, but just wanted to show you what it looks like if you're going for a smooth handheld look instead.
I'm realizing that this is not easier than shooting with a gimbal. This is actually way harder because I don't have any machinery keeping the camera pointed in any particular direction. So if my hand slips a little bit, then the framing suffers, the camera slips. Whereas if I had a gimbal, as long as I keep my hand on the gimbal, it will keep the camera pointed in the right direction, and then it will compensate for a lot of my errors. And yes, I can stabilize this in post, and I can reframe it in post and make it look better. It won't be as shaky, but if he ever goes out of frame, I can't fix that. I can't bring him back into frame if he's out of frame in the original shot. I guess the takeaway is that you really do need to shoot with a wider focal length if you're capturing more motion in your frame, because it's just too hard to keep the subject properly framed on a tighter focal length, shooting handheld and walking around. We're going to try something easier now because it's a much more conservative movement.
And now here is a much simpler camera move, just a slight rotation to the right. Looks terrible in the original footage because there's all sorts of jitters happening all over the place. But once I crank up that Gyroflow stabilization, it turns into a nice dolly tracking move to the right.
That is still really hard to do. It's just hard to keep the camera level and pan smoothly, not accidentally tilt.
For this shot, I'm trying out some more complex camera movement and blocking, staying closer to the subject overall. The unstabilized result is unwatchably shaky and looks totally unprofessional. With Gyroflow on high, there is that significant crop once again because there was so much shake in the original footage, but it does a really nice job of smoothing out the camera movements, even in the shot with complex motion. And for that handheld shoulder cam look, I've just reduced the overall smoothness a bit, but I kept the horizon locked. That means that the horizon isn't drifting all around, I just allowed a bit more of the bobbing and weaving of the natural camera movement.
We have changed locations once again, and now I have the 18mm f2.8 lens on my camera. We're gonna do a wide angle test to see how well the gyro stabilization works with a very wide lens.
An 18mm lens is like playing this game on easy. It's much easier to get a stabilized, well-framed shot. It becomes almost indistinguishable from a gimbal shot. And with the low level of gyro stabilization, you get a nice rolling handheld shot that might suit your purposes if you're going for something a bit more documentary or a bit more casual.
Go for it.
And of course, we had to try running. So here I am jogging at a medium pace, and without stabilization, it looks predictably terrible. But with Gyroflow applied at a high setting, I would call these results acceptable. And with less stabilization, I still like the look of it because it emulates running with a much heavier cinema camera.
Go.
Now here's an even tougher one. I'm side tracking with the subject, and my horizon immediately goes way off because it's just so hard to keep a level horizon while you're running to the side. But with Gyroflow, I can automatically fix that horizon. The low stabilization doesn't look so great to me here, but there might be a purpose for it in a certain kind of story. And here's a full out sprint, full speed, and there is just an incredible amount of shake in this raw footage, completely unwatchable. Let's see how it looks with Gyroflow. With the stabilization cranked up super high, it becomes almost usable, but of course you still see some shakes getting through there. And with the stabilization at a low level, I would only use this for a stylized kind of scene where I wanted a frantic, shaky look, but not too shaky.
Under no normal circumstances would I try to shoot a smooth tracking running shot handheld with mini tripod feet on my camera. I would definitely either use a stabilizer or I'd have some sort of a vehicle, ideally, so that I could focus on the framing instead of focusing on trying not to lose my breath.
So that's my real world demo of Gyroflow stabilization. Once again, I am not sponsored by Gyroflow. I just made this video because I wanted to show you a better way to stabilize your footage in post and have more creative fun with that stabilization.
And I want to say thank you to Libby and Marcel for helping out with this video. They have Free to Use Sounds, which is a YouTube channel. It's also a place that you can go online, freetoUseSounds.com. Check it out, link in the description. And otherwise, please click like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.